Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of A.IdlePodcast, the podcast where I do weekly book reviews. This week I read Grown by Tiffany D. Jackson. This is the story of Enchanted Jones, who is a young girl who thinks she knows what she wants out of life. She has a clear dream while still in high school, and then she meets a persuasive older man, and she falls into a trap of an ultimately abusive relationship. Now, trigger warning for anyone that has dealt with anything relating to sexual assault, or if you are sensitive to topics like this is probably the only time I'm going to encourage you to skip an episode, just because there are very heavy situational traumas described here, and it's nothing too graphic, but the overall tone of the book is very draining, to say the least. So just keep that in mind. Now, I won't go into too much detail, but still, the topic of the conversation in this analysis is going to touch on some pretty upsetting subjects. Now, released in 2020, this novel by Tiffany D. Jackson is one of many in her young adult fiction collections. So she is kind of honed in on an audience, and this fits right into the type of book that I think a lot of young adults will like to read. I think it's certainly something that a lot of people need to read because it does show a different perspective to a genre audience that mainly gets a lot of fairy tale romances or post-apocalyptic dystopian type pieces. So this is certainly one of the first books that I've read that is specifically young adult material that is, conveyed correctly and appropriately, but it does deal with stuff that is not always idealistic. Now, before we even get into this, and this is discussed by Jackson at the end of the book anyway, but there are a lot of R. Kelly parallels, and per Jackson, this isn't really based on R. Kelly, but I do think that this story, there's a lot of details that are very similar to his situation and the type of messed up stuff that he has been accused of. And as of today, actually, I think he was convicted on a lot of those counts. So just keep that in mind. That's the type of stuff we're dealing with. Alrighty, so this book is structured very well when it comes to a high school English lesson. Like, you get 4 parts, and you can almost feel, the tension rising as you get to part 3 and 4. Part 1 opens with a jarring look at the present situation that Enchanted is in. And it's jarring because she wakes up and there's blood everywhere. There's a main character that is bruised. She's confused. She has no idea what happened. And there's also a secondary character that's dead. So we're kind of put into this situation of, all right, this is where we stand. And of course, in order to figure that out, we need to dive into the background. So part 1 is mainly about the beginnings of Enchanted and Korey's relationship. Part 2 is where we get into the core of their relationship, and this is really what includes a lot of mental, sexual, and physical abuse. So that's on full display here, and it's very what's the word I would use? It's very unsettling to read that part. It's really like a dark, it's just not fun. And we are experiencing this story from Enchanted's point of view, so we're getting her narration, so everything that she feels, we feel as well. So this was not very fun section to read. Now, part 2 ends with Enchanted really coming to terms with reality. Part 3 is where we really see it amp up. And it's almost like the climax. This is where we get the fallout from the public embarrassment that she has to deal with. This is also where we get the motif of mental illness being used as an excuse to dismiss her claims. And then finally, part 4, it feels kind of slow, but this really is the conclusion. This is where we get a resolution to a lot of different storylines. And I won't necessarily say we get justice or, the story ends, because that's not the case at all. But there is some sort of resolution that we get to. And as we can see with the opening scene, somebody ends up dead. So, alrighty, so for characters, I really just want to hit on Enchanted Jones and Korey Fields. Those are our two main characters. We're experiencing the story through Enchanted, and her love interest is Korey Fields. Now, I would describe Enchanted as a dreamer, someone who is blinded by ambition, which is not always a bad thing, but it's not always a good thing either. She's willing to rough it out to get to the end, to get to her goal. For example, waiting out a lot of the abuse that she experiences in order to finish her album, in order to record another song, or just kind of convincing herself that if she stays a few more weeks or a few more months or whatever, it'll all be worth it in the end. She is naive by age, and I say that because I think some people choose to be ignorant to, just the world, and it's not that she's choosing to not understand certain things. She's just young. At 17 years old, especially once you get older, and the older you get, you realize how little you really understood about the world. And so there's a lot of just situational awareness that she hadn't developed at this point. And so she's ultimately naive. And I think sometimes we use that trait to describe characters who kind of, choose to be that way. And so I don't want to put that on her. I just think that, she's young. That's it. Now, she is a hard worker, and this is shown through her responsibilities, in particular to her family. She is the oldest of a quite large family. There are a few young kids in the family that she is tasked with caring for at times, including, feeding them or making sure they get to bed, all that good stuff when her parents are at work. So really, she represents the typical teenage girl, the girl that is yearning for a love life, that finds an older guy attractive, wishes they could be with that person, and really just searching for the meaning in life, searching for what their purpose is, what do they want out of life, and coming to the realization that only they can really provide themselves with that answer. And I think in turn that leads to a little bit of a rebellious phase, but that's really just because, as teens, you really think that you're doing yourself a favor by not listening to anyone else but your inner voices, which are a lot of the times tainted by hormones, to say the least. But all right, so Korey Fields is a sexual predator, an egomaniac, and someone who is seriously emotionally deprived. This person is older. I think he was either 28 or 29, and he is a very successful, very talented musician. But he uses manipulation to force a outcome favoring him in almost every situation that he is involved in. So he purposely damages other people in the process. And not one time did we ever really get an ounce of remorse from him. He's arrogant, and this really stems from his celebrity status. He's expecting this godlike admiration or this godlike treatment where he's really not to be questioned. What he says goes, and that's it. He uses his money to make things go away. This is actually one of the more important tools I think that he uses, because most of the world does need money most of the time to pay their bills. And so throwing out money to make situations go away, or using it to butter up the parents of these girls, or say, you know what, I'll pay for the schooling of your other child, if you let this one come with me on tour, or I'll give you tickets to this concert, or I'll give you this, I'll give you that. This is him using everything that he has strategically to get what he wants. So again, manipulating the situation to produce a favorable outcome for him. And then towards the end, we see that if a girl is lucky enough to get out of a situation with him, that he will use his influence to blackball this person. A lot of the times it's alluded that the girls were around him for singing careers because they were promised, some sort of, whether it's help or just guidance in the music industry, and they end up in a situation that is not conducive to that at all. So once they get out of it, they're left with a damaged psyche above all else, but they also have no hope of a career because they've been blackballed. And so you can see how a lot of these victims felt contained in the situation, because it's almost like once you're in it and you realize this is some terrible stuff going on and it's not helping me at all, it's hurting me in every way possible, but it's like, what's waiting for you on the other side? So that could be, super scary. And we do see that from a few different points of views very briefly when it comes to characters outside of Enchanted, but we see how that played out for other girls as well. Now, above all else, Korey is calculated, and this can be seen in his business dealings, how he handles, his career, but also how he preys on women. He goes about things very specifically, and I'll get into that in just a second when I talk about his relationship with Enchanted, but he also uses information as a tool as well by leaking it to the press. And this is powerful because when you're able to reach droves of people with a design narrative, you're able to sway public opinion. And whether we want to admit it or not, public opinion is a factor in a lot of people's careers and reputations. And so having that reach of a celebrity and being able to put out tainted views and tell your fans, look, this girl is lying, period, that's it. That's pretty scary to go up against. And it just shows how their position influences the outcome of a situation where they are implicated as a criminal. Okay. Now, their relationship has a few phases, and as we can see, it's very strategic on Korey's part when we look back on it that he set it up this way. So it starts as a mentor-mentee situation, really kind of centered on music. They met at a music competition, and he promised her, lessons, or I could take you on tour, and then we can do the album and do all this stuff. And so there's also this underlying bonding, quote unquote, which is false, but through song preferences or saying, hey, I like this artist. Don't you like this artist? Oh, this one's old school. That's cool that you like that. This is all him just, working up to really terrible, motives. So then we get to this whole pre-romance phase, which is like the friendship phase. This is where you're sharing information with the other person. You're telling them about the people around you. You're venting about your life, what you don't like out of your life, what you want out of life, how different people around you operate, whether it's your parents, whether it's your best friend. And what we find is he uses this information in the end, again, for himself. And so I never really thought about that. Like when you're talking to someone, when you're getting to know them, it's normal for you to kind of let them in on your life, but this does make me second guess, just sharing all of that information, because one, you don't really know the person enough yet, and two, you don't know how that relationship is going to end, or if it will end, what they're going to do with that. We've heard about people being stalked after breakups. They will stalk family members, God forbid they know like where your parents live or something like that. And this was all on full display in this book. So he really used all of those meetups to comfort her, again, for himself in the end, to keep her there. And then lastly, we get to the stage of romance or intimacy. And honestly, it was very forced and one-sided. And again, Jackson doesn't go into any like detail, so she's not describing anything, but you can tell that Sorry. You can tell that Enchanted Jones, I don't think she's mentally ready to even have a romantic relationship because she really doesn't seem into it like that at all. And Korey very much is, and very much is persuading her to do things that she wouldn't have done on her own or wouldn't have gone along with if he wasn't the one telling her, I need you to do this to make me feel better. And those words actually came out of his mouth. If anyone is telling you that you need to do something so that they can feel better, I feel like that's a red flag. So if there's nothing else you can learn from this book, if somebody says that to you, just run. That's probably not a good sign. Themes. So obviously the biggest theme from this book is the Me Too movement, the Time's Up movement, which is actually referenced by name at parts in the book. But this encompasses a lot of things, including the conversation on believing women. A lot of times now, if someone comes forward with a sexual assault allegation, it seems that there is always a core group of people that is set on not believing them. And that is dangerous because if someone is coming out and saying, I have been hurt, I am the victim of a crime, and the first instinct of, let's say, their friends is to say, yeah, you're lying, we don't believe you, that furthers the trauma, that furthers the hurt and maybe the depression that they're going through. And what we find is, in addition to Enchanted's former friends and classmates, law enforcement had a level of not trusting her by questioning her story or, poking all the holes in their story. And that may seem like it's, routine, but there was really no reason for them not to believe her. They just kind of didn't believe her. They didn't. And it was very hard to read through those parts. I'm not gonna lie, because it has to be tough to be in a situation where you've already experienced something that has damaged you and will probably impact you for the rest of your life. And now you have to defend yourself against the entire world. That can't be a good feeling. So if anyone is going through that, I sincerely apologize for all of the people that are stupid. So, and also, I just want to say this. I'm probably going to say this at the end of the episode. If anyone feels like they need to talk, you can DM my account, DM the A.Idle Instagram account, Twitter. I don't go on Twitter on that account that often, but comment section, email, it's always open. In addition to some of the resources that Jackson left at the end of the book as well, which are more, like organization resources and numbers to call if you've experienced any of this. But if you want someone to just talk to, you can always talk to me. I feel like I'm pretty easy to talk to. So I just wanted to put that in there. Okay, so then the just general topic of sexual assault allegations. What happens is, what we see is people who have a serious problem where they cannot stop sexually assaulting people, probably because they keep getting away with it. But what we see is when one person comes forward, more women come. And it's now like a trend. Like as soon as an allegation pops up, there's going to be more to follow. And I just wanted to comment on this because what we see in this book is the reason a lot of these women didn't come forward is because they didn't have enough support around them, or they thought they were the only ones and they would not be believed. And so we do see an act of sisterhood towards the end with the victims, where they come together and talk about how people didn't believe them when they came out on their own, but once something was put out into the public, they felt like they had a voice. And lastly, when it comes to the Me Too Time's Up movement, I wanted to touch on grooming, because that is ultimately what the relationship between Korey and Enchanted was. It was Korey grooming Enchanted. And what that means is it's basically when a younger adult, not young adult, like teenage, like underage, is being preyed upon by an older person, with that older person's intention being to mold them into the person that they need or want them to be, that's not okay. Because when you're younger, you don't really have a clear understanding of what you want to be. And so anyone coming along and taking advantage of that, soft spot and saying, okay, well, you don't know who you want to be. Well, I'm going to turn you into who I want you to be. Whether that be physical changes to your appearance, suggesting that you change this, you do this. In the book, Enchanted was encouraged to grow her hair out because she was bald, and also get a wig and wear all this makeup and all this other stuff, or just personality. For someone to come along and say you need to act like this in order to be with me, you need to drop that person. That's them attempting to groom you. This is the reason why the age of consent is 18, why you're not considered an adult until you're 18, because really you can't make a solid decision at that, prior to that age, because you haven't experienced enough of life yet. And really, what I'm really seeing in the real world is that a lot of people can't really make solid decisions on their own until they're over 25. But, age of consent, whatever. But that's why that whole thing is there. That's why it's not okay for grown people to be dating kids in high school. Like, what are we doing here? Like, it makes no sense. But basically, it's just teens are very naive and they're easy to manipulate. So that's why a lot of the times these older guys be hanging around high schools, picking up high school girls, because they want those girls that are going to cater to their every need and not question them. On a lighter note, my second theme here is dreaming. So I mentioned that Enchanted is a dreamer, and her having the boldness, the audacity to dream in the face of reality is really what sets her apart from every other character in this book. She's working tirelessly towards a singing career while balancing family responsibilities, including caring for her siblings with student activities, keeping her grades up, swimming, being one of the best swimmers on the team, and also a lot of microaggressions that she deals with from being one of the few Black people at her high school. And so for her to not let any of that stop her from having vocal lessons by herself for 10 minutes, before class, or memorizing songs or writing songs on her own, or, doing all this. A lot of people have things that they want to accomplish. Very few of them will give up their free time or carve out free time in their busy schedule to work towards that. So she exemplifies a lot of what people should be, trying to chase whatever dream that they have, whatever it may be. And she has one of the, I don't want to say hard lives, but she does have responsibilities. She's not laying around after school. She's taking care of her siblings. Her parents are both working just to put them through these fancy schools and all this good stuff. And she is still, going after what she wants in life. And that's very commendable. And lastly, love, of course. So when it comes to romantic relationships, of course we have romantic. We have Enchanted and Korey, but honestly, was that really love? It was just really completely inappropriate and toxic. So I wanted to throw that in there because that is the focal point of this book, but that wasn't real love. And then we have Gab and her boyfriend, which was an interesting addition to the cast of characters here because they also have an age difference. I want to say it was like 3 or 4 years, with her boyfriend being 18 and her being 16? How old is her boyfriend? I don't know, but I know that those few years, she still falls into the minor side and he is legally an adult. So I guess there's more of a level playing field, but even with that type of stuff, it's very sticky. But the difference with this couple was that they both met when they were minors. So I don't know. I wonder about, the including their relationship. I don't know if it was to put into focus the the age range of Enchanted and Korey, or to combat it. I don't know. But it was mostly absent from the story, but I think it was possible inspiration for Enchanted to want love so bad, because it's not like she was lacking emotionally. She did have a family that loved her and she had a great relationship with them. So I think, she just wanted a boyfriend just because her best friend had one. Obviously that's not the whole story, but And then, speaking of familial love, we had a lot of that showcased through the trauma the whole family went through after Enchanted came out of this situation. And what we see is that her father in particular shows a stunning duality, because in focus, when we're really focusing on Enchanted's story, her father seems really distant and cold. But what we find out after the fact is that he himself took calculated risk in favor of Enchanted, to get her out of the situation that she was in. And I think that's a good depiction of a parent's love, because we may not always see what they're doing behind the scenes to benefit us, but in the face of something where they may be disappointed in you, or maybe even slightly angry, it's like they never really stopped fighting for you. And her dad certainly represented that very well. And I caught myself being a little mad at him at times, because he really did seem cold after, her whole relationship with Korey kind of was put out to the public and that whole fiasco happened. But he definitely cares, and he was trying so hard to make it better. He just didn't know how. And there were a couple motifs as well. We see that water is mentioned a lot. Enchanted calls herself a mermaid, and it's funny because she's always yearning for the water. Her comfort place is the beach. She feels comfortable swimming. Obviously, she's a swimmer. She's a successful athlete. And she shaved her head in part to be faster, but I think it was mostly to be in line with the dress code, because she had dreads before. But, there's some type of dedication in shaving your head. And then also, she just feels kind of odd on the surface. Like, she doesn't really feel like she has it all together unless she's swimming. Which is funny, because if you guys listen every week, you know that I just read Shallow Waters by Anita Kopash, and that reminds me of the character of Yemaya. Now, another thing in the water, a jellyfish, is compared to Korey. And this metaphor, it's funny because this is when she starts realizing that she is in an abusive relationship. She said jellyfish have no brains, and neither does Korey, because Korey feigns ignorance every time she brings up the promises that he made her. But also, jellyfish are spineless. So is Korey when he disregards her as a human being and treats her like crap. And there's like a whole list of it, but I thought that was really interesting, where she sees herself as a mermaid who is, one of the most peaceful people, but a jellyfish is Korey, who wrapped her up in his tentacles and, just was a terrible person. And last motif before we get to the review is the conversation on mental illness. So Enchanted's grandmother has some type of mental illness. It's not really discussed in depth, but there's something not right there. So I'm just assuming it was either Alzheimer's, or maybe she was schizophrenic, or maybe just disassociated with reality. But she's seen at some points in the book talking to no one, talking to empty space. And so it's implied heavily that it runs in the family. And this was used as one of the excuses for a lot of the doubts that the police had about Enchanted's story when she finally came forward. And this is a well-known tactic to silence, victims and survivors of situations like this, because once you call someone crazy, it just dismisses everything that they've ever said. And so if you can convince everyone or a jury that somebody is crazy, then their account of the story is no longer valid. And last motif here is wealth. So it's interesting that there's like this wealthy black kid club in this book, And I wish I could remember I guess I could open up the book and figure out what it was, but it's fine. I think it's based on Jack and Jill. I've heard of it, but I've never been in it because we weren't wealthy. But there's an emphasis on appearing non-ghetto and not conforming to the stereotypes. I think that this specific group of Black people, because they're in an area that is dominated by white people who have a lot of status and wealth, that they have to carry themselves a certain way, and they have to make sure that they never conform to a stereotype. And so there's this hierarchy of Blackness kind of in the background where wealthy Black kids hold themselves a little bit higher than other people. And of course, when, this story broke, one of the, I think they were calling her ghetto or something like that, or saying that it was bringing the ghetto to the club, which makes no sense. There's no correlation there, but it just shows that they're under immense stress to hold up this this hierarchy of, the wealthy Black, well-behaved, well-accomplished teenager. So with that being said, looking up the reviews on this book, they were all very good. Excellent reviews. Everyone that read it seemed to enjoy it. Obviously, this was released in 2021, and we're kind of in the thick of the Me Too Time's Up era. And so it really, that whole movement certainly set the stage for this release. And I think that this is going to be one of those one of those pieces that in the future, it marks the historical events, of the past few decades. This is going to be one of those books that people are going to read and say, okay, so that's what it was like to live and watch these victims come forward and see everyone, how the world reacted and how the world condemned them to either, unbelievable or crazy or trying to tear somebody down. So it's certainly accurate to the time. There were even tweets or blog comments that were included in the book, and that shows obviously, how information spreads on the internet and social media. So certainly this is going to be one of those fiction pieces that, even though it's fiction, it's going to be historically accurate in the future, certainly. For me, here's the thing. When I picked this book up, and it was a few months ago that I bought it, I'm pretty sure I just bought it for the cover. And if you're watching the visual episode, you already know that cover is fire, okay? And Rachel Baker actually is the one who is responsible for that. So I did not read what this story was about. I just saw the cover and I bought it. Had I had known what this was about, I probably would have planned a better time to read it because it is emotionally draining. I do think, however, that this is a young adult novel that most, if not all, teen girls should read, just to give them some type of warning, on entering situations that may not be conducive to healthy mentalities. But I read it on a Sunday, and I was able to fall into the story, and I got through half of it pretty quickly, but I did not want to go to sleep before I finished the book because I did not want to, how do I say it? I didn't want to sit in that energy because it was tough. And I think the toughest part for me was experiencing that through Enchanted, just dealing with people that didn't believe her. That was really tough. Let alone, reading the abusive nature of her relationship, but it was a lot, and it was very tough to read if you're one of those people that is emotionally sensitive to just everything in general, but especially falling in these universes and dealing with these characters that you feel like it was tough to read. Wasn't a bad book at all. The writing was fantastic. But the topic is not easy. It's not an easy thing to stomach. So if anything though, I think you should buy this book for the cover. Even if you don't want to read it, if you're emotionally sensitive like me, that's fine. Just buy it and look at the cover, and you'll support an amazing Black woman who writes her own books and is published and all that good stuff. But if you're not up for it, don't force yourself to read it. Like I said, it's not graphic at all, but it's just tough. It's one of those things that brings your mood down, and you don't want to be stuck in that for too long. Yeah, so it was great. But I think all in all, the takeaway of this is to go with your gut. Lean on the people around you, your friends, your family, and don't let anyone make decisions for you. And that's not specifically talking about the decisions that Enchanted made. That's really in reference to what rules you have to follow in order to get what you want. Don't let anyone tell you that you have to do things their way to accomplish your goal, to get that job. No. You do it how you want to do it, okay? And go from there. Don't put yourself in the line of fire of someone who probably really doesn't care about you, so that you can play by their game and hope that they reward you in the end. Don't do that. But anyway, this is a heavy book. I don't know what I'm going to read next, but I'm going to try to find something that's like happy, or a nonfiction piece. Those aren't usually happy though. But as always, if you have any suggestions, just let me know. On Instagram, it's at A.IdlePodcast. On Twitter, it's at A.IdlePodcast. Gmail is A.IdlePodcast@gmail.com. If you have any suggestions, comments, concerns, please let me know. Thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. I will see you guys next week, and I hope everyone has a great, amazing, fantastic weekend. Thank you.